Welcome to Penn State Dickinson Law's Profiles in Leadership series. I'm Daryl Lim, Associate Dean for Research and Strategic Partnerships. This series explores leadership through the eyes of lawyers, judges, policymakers, and innovators as they reflect on their journeys and lessons. It's a pleasure to welcome today's guest, Cheryl Seah, who serves as Director in the Corporate and Finance Department at Drew and Napier, a leading law firm in Singapore. Her practice spans telecommunications, media and technology, AI and digital trusts, as well as administrative and public law. Alongside her practice, she is a prolific public contributor. Her writing on AI and technology law for the Law Society of Singapore has been widely read, cited by regulators, and recognized with the Best Feature Article Award at the 2024 Law Gazette Awards. She is a sought-after speaker on AI and digital regulation, having addressed industry groups, regulators, and universities in Singapore, across the region, and internationally, and she contributes to global research initiatives on responsible AI. She's also an industry fellow with the Singapore Management University Center for Digital Law. Before entering private practice, Cheryl served as a state counsel and legislative drafter in Singapore's Attorney General's chambers, advising ministries and statutory boards on policy design, legal risk, and legislative implementation. She's drafted legislation across a wide range of areas, including transport and autonomous vehicles, infrastructure technology, and civil procedure, and played a leading role in the 2020 revised edition of Acts, Singapore's largest revision of laws to date. Earlier in her career, Cheryl served as a deputy public prosecutor. Today's conversation draws on that unique trajectory across prosecution, legislative drafting, and frontier technology practice. I'm very much looking forward to exploring how these experiences shape Cheryl's approach to leadership. Cheryl, thank you so much for making the time and welcome to Profiles in Leadership.
Thank you, Daryl, for having me. I'm actually really excited to have this conversation with you today.
We're delighted to have you. Let's start at the beginning. Now, when you look back over your career, what early experiences most shape how you think about leadership?
Mm, So I started my career in 2012. I joined the Singapore Legal Service after graduating as a prosecutor. The people I met would have been my first bosses. This year I'm actually 36, so it's also not been too long since I was an associate. So I guess probably the first principle would be um, you kind of want to treat others the way you've been treated. In my career, I've worked with a variety of senior colleagues across different divisions. Um, so at the end of the day, you kind of remember the experiences you had as an associate. So sometimes, you've submitted a draft at 10 p.m., you're not sure whether you still need to be on standby or not. So I feel it's really helpful if the senior on the file tells you, actually, we don't need you again till 9 a.m. See you in the morning. Because at that times I remembered I've been in the office at 9 p.m. I haven't had dinner yet. I'm hungry, but I don't know if I can leave. So I think this is the sort of things that you try and remember and you carry forward, to be a bit more considerate to your juniors. So I do hope that in 10 or 20 years, I'll still remember what it was like. Then maybe slowly going back to how I think about leadership. If Daryl, you indulge me, I'll just talk about maybe four people who have really shaped my perspective on it. The first one was is actually my first ever boss. He was called Mr. Wong. I worked in crime. I started doing property offences. So he was my first boss. Everyone said he was the best boss you could have as a starting out person because he was really chill and he really was, and he was really full of guidance. But what I appreciate about him was that there was once actually I had quite a bad cough in the office, and he was coming back from lunch. I think he could hear me coughing, and he had his bottle of liang teh. So for an international audience, that's like a cooling herbal drink. And then he heard me coughing and he just passed it to me saying, I think you're going to need this more than me. So that really left a very lasting impression because I felt very seen by someone who I worked with. So that's one of the very defining things. So when I heard now he was made Singapore's first chief public defender, my sentiment is they really couldn't have found a more compassionate person for this role. The second person was called Mr. Mark T. So he actually instilled in me that spirit of you cannot smoke your way through anything. Um, So seniors would say that, every time you met him, you would actually have to bring all the statutes you're referring to him. So if you're talking about the Road Traffic Act, you better have the hard copy. Criminal procedure, you better bring the hard copy because he's going to quiz you about it. He's going to like say flip to section 234 and tell me what it says. So because of this, I've learned to always be prepared. You can't smoke. You can't give any kind of proximate answers. The third person who I worked with was actually one who, when I moved to legislation division, so early in my career, he was one of those I worked with. He's called Wee um, what I really appreciated about him was, so when you're really early on in your career, you don't quite know how to manage clients. So sometimes you might say things to them that don't come out maybe the way you intend, especially when they're really um, panicked or maybe a bit, there's a deadline they're working against. But there are some legal issues with the policy they've come up with that might mean it's a no-go before the deadline. So maybe the way I communicated to the client wasn't the best. So obviously I got a shelling over the phone, like it was really loud screaming. And I was so panicked because this was after hours as well. So he could have easily gone home. In fact, he was about to go home, but I actually approached him. I said, there's this issue. What am I going to do about this? And can you help me? And he actually did stay back. He also called the client because that client was an old friend of his. He smoothed over the matter. And then after that, he gave me chocolate. It was like a lint red wrappered chocolate. I actually kept the wrapper for a long time to actually remind me of this act of grace, where a panicking junior is asking you like, what can you do? And you sacrifice your dinner plans, you stay on a call with them, you help them with the next draft, and it's really late by the time you leave. Um, then the last person I actually worked with was Mrs. Me. So she's the head of legislation. She's actually seen me from since I was a trainee until I worked with her, even now into private practice. Um, so what I learned from her is, you can be like really like down to business, but at the same time really approachable. And this is, I think this anecdote about her, which I'll share, will probably illustrate this point. So she had tasked me with sort of coming up with a naming convention for certain documents we had to tag, those kind of electronic filing. So different people who were in charge of different divisions would have some sort of ID tag to them. So we've got like publication teams, legal teams, data teams, and all that. So I thought I'd come up with like the best names, right? Like legal dash IC, in IC meaning in charge. Database, I just called them data IC. Editorial, I called them editorial dash IC. Then publications, because it was a really long word, I just shortened it to pub-IC and I, gave it to her. But then she had returned me the draft with changing pub-IC to something like pub-lead. And I was like really curious, like, why did you change it? So you have to imagine that now the scene is about maybe 6 or 7 p.m. It's after hours already. So Mrs. Me's like clearing all her urgent government files and me being, I think at the rather imprudent and tender age of 23 was like knocking on her door saying, excuse me, Mrs. Wee, why did you change it? Why did you change it to pub lead? Because now it doesn't match the rest. Everyone's an IC. And then she had to like look up from her files and like look at me and be like, Cheryl, do you know what it spells? Yeah, I just couldn't for the life of me still fathom. But I mean, she had to break the news to me that it spelled pub IC spelled pubic, which is a really unfortunate acronym. And I think what I took away from this is just that I think first her demeanor was, even though she was really strict, I felt no worries in approaching her. I could even ask her these very trivial things when she was busy. But the second thing was that kind of spirit of excellence she embodied in her work. It wasn't just legislation, but even something as simple as vetting the sort of like domain names, domain holders. She actually did apply her mind to it and could catch all these things. So I think these are the four people who really, when you gave me that question, I thought about it, kind of really shaped my philosophy of how I want to be a leader going forward.
Thanks. Certainly four great leaders and mentors in your life. So do you have chocolate and herbal tea in your office on standby now?
Um, chocolate and herbal tea, yes. And also a meal delivery app. Should we actually have to sit through lunch? Because there was once I had to was working with our two colleagues.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I didn't say thankfully they had to sacrifice their lunch break, but we ordered delivery through the apps. Yeah.
So you decided after you graduated from law school to go into government service and not into private practice. How did you make that decision?
Mm. Okay, so this was probably born of desire actually to be a drafter from the very get-go. I really enjoyed that process. And so maybe it's just two things actually. I really wanted to be a drafter. And secondly, my interactions with pro bono cases when I was in law school made me feel that I really didn't want to bill because you wanted to do as much as justice required. But now I'm in private practice, I bill all the time. So it's a separate matter. But what started was this pro bono project within the NUS Faculty of Law. It's called the Moot Parliament Program. It's actually hosted by Singapore's Ministry of Education. They actually have a program for upper secondary students. So these are like students who are about between 14 to 16 years old. Um, and then they actually pretend to be parliamentarians and come up with, bills to address social issues. Everything like compulsory mandatory military service for women, legalizing commercial surrogacy, even like carbon taxes. So when I first mentored a team, that was for, I think, some changes to the Public Order Act. That was my first year. I had no clue what I was doing. It was carried by the senior on the file. But the second year, in university, I did a team doing overseas postal voting. So currently in Singapore, you actually have to go down physically to polling stations, but they wanted to allow people to go to embassies and send their votes back. Um, um, sorry, not send your votes back. Sorry, I think it's more than because you go to the embassies to physically vote. So it means that you could send a ballot paper to your house and then you mail it back. So I really enjoyed that process of trying to think like, the things that could go wrong, election fraud and all that. And it's kind of like a squirrel trying to crack a nut, to really get to the nub of the issue. And how do you write something such that the most unreasonable person can't find a loophole within it. So I really love this. And it sparked this desire, like, could I actually do this for a living? So in my end of the second year, I did an internship with the Attorney General's chambers. I did internship with crime. I found it really meaningful. Then part of the rotation saw me talking to drafters in person, and I was like, "You guys exist." And it's something I want to do. So I applied to the Attorney General's chambers for a training contract at the end of my second year, was accepted. But back then, the policy for legislation was that they didn't take in fresh grads. So I actually spent about 3 years within crime division first to understand, how the legal system worked, also to hone your advocacy and sort of like research skills as well. Then every year I would ask, could I please post to Legis? I really enjoyed my time in crime though, but I wanted to be a drafter. So in my third year, I was actually moved to the legislation division, and it was a really, really great 8 years with them.
So, what surprised you most about how the law is actually made, revised, and implemented?
Mm. I guess if I honestly, I would love to start a YouTube channel called like Secrets from the Sausage Factory, showing you how the sausage is made. But I'm very aware of the OSA, the Official Secrets Act. But I think the first thing that surprised me when I interacted with legislation division was it's such a team sport. You think that drafters are just sort of like hiding away at their desk and just like furiously typing away on the screen. But you realize that there are actually so many functions that are supporting them. So there were about 30 drafters in the division, but we were supported by a team that was even larger. So we had of about 10 editorial staff who would actually check your work for like house style, your cross-referencing. We also have a team of about 10 people who will format the documents and make sure that they are ready to be published online, making sure all the links work and so on. Then we also have a team of about 10 that actually maintain our online statutes database, on top of the usual functions like registry and secretarial support. So I think that really surprised me in that I didn't know that back end there would be so many people, just supporting the drafting of laws. Then the second thing was you're amazed at how much you can actually help to make a policy clearer. Because I also used to be laboring under this impression, what exactly do drafters do? Do you just write some sort of special statutory language? You just turn, plain text into something more complicated or like fancy sounding. And or if you wanted to express an idea, what do you like look at maybe another jurisdiction that has done it and copy their laws? So when I went in, I actually found it was a really creative process. You'd have to do like when you talk to the clients. So I'm going to use an example that one of my colleagues, Hema, had given before, I thought was a really good example. So she says, like, look, if the policy is a chicken in every pot, right? Your instinct as a drafter is not to try and translate that into the most complicated fancy language ever, like find a scientific name for chicken, which is Scalus domesticus, just to be precise. And then to define pot is like an earthenware vessel or silverware and so on. She said that's not what you do. You have to stress test it with your client. You have to ask like, hey, if you want to alleviate hunger, that's why you declare a chicken in every pot. What do you do about the vegetarians? What do you do if there's a chicken shortage? What can you replace it with? A chicken in every pot. Is it one pot per household, even if you've got 10 people there, or is it one chicken per person? Or is it to fill every pot you own? So if I've got 50 pots, it's great. Or how frequently do you distribute it? So she said you have to ask all these questions to understand what they want and try and fill in the gaps so that whatever you draft is really comprehensive. So I think that's another thing that surprised me about how legislation drafters work, because we don't just take the instructions and translate them as is. You really have to stress test what the client's asking.
Yeah, so did they also make you learn the scientific names for other animals or birds or just chicken?
Surprisingly, yes. Surprisingly, yes. I have encountered them because we have like Singapore has like laws we sign conventions against the import and export of endangered animals.
Yes.
So I've had to put in certain types of ducks and other types of like rosewood items. So it's always so that's why the publication teams and the editorial teams are really helpful, because sometimes your fingers might slip or you copy paste wrongly. They actually do check the wordings of every single item, even if it's in Latin.
Interesting. So I want to go back to a couple of things that I mentioned that you worked on during that time. Because one is, I think, the 2020 revised edition of Acts was particularly important in Singapore's legislative history. But the other thing that I'm very curious about is you worked on autonomous vehicle legislation, and we're only just starting to see autonomous vehicles, not just in Singapore, but elsewhere. How did you that far back decide what the correct legislation would be for autonomous vehicles?
So I think a lot of policy would be driven by the ministries who will see the need for it. So actually, autonomous vehicles, we've actually had legislation in relation to them even as early in relation to like maybe 2013, 2012. So these were not in the form of a regulatory sandbox in the Road Traffic Act, but they were actually specific exemptions under the Road Traffic Act, because the road traffic act is premised on there being a human in the driver's seat. So we have to make exemptions under it. So I think 2012, 2013, there were exemption orders. Then it became a more sort of a framework within the Road Traffic Act in 2017. And then after that, also you have more and more trials. So we also had so if they're roads, it's governed by one law. Then if they're on actually pavements, public paths, they're governed by another law, the Active Mobility Act. So I had actually drafted those exemptions under the active mobility side as well, for vehicles to move at like like tourist attractions and so on. So I think it's interesting because I think Singapore tries to be very forward-looking with the laws. So especially issues relating to maybe like liability and all, if it's not necessarily settled, it's okay. You can have a sandbox first. So this gives like a limited parameters. People can apply for trials and permits to, see whether their items are a go or no go. The regulators will of course monitor it closely and get incident reports, get feedback before they tweak the policy again.
So I'm curious, have you ever had an opportunity to say to the judge or opposing counsel if there's a dispute on legislation? I know because I drafted it.
Honestly, not yet. And depending on the nature of the dispute, depending on how I drafted it, I might not want to say that I'm behind it. But I do have instances where I go out and have to, what quote, eat my own cooking, which is referred to something that I might necessarily have worked on before. So thankfully, it's actually quite straightforward. It might be in relation to a like licensing process, or actually what does this particular instance mean. So thankfully, no disputes in court yet.
So you decided that you were going to switch from government service and you're now in private practice. How did you decide when was the right time to switch and where was the right place to land?
So I was in crime from 2012 to 2015, legislation from 2015. So the universal revision actually started, I was brought in to sort of manage the project in 2019. So the idea was that we would be out and published by 2020, but then COVID hit. So I think timelines and all that also had to slow because there were just other national priorities. So when I finished the universal revision in 2020, the end of 2021, so that was 31st December 2021, I was kind of thinking like, what next? Because we already done the revision of the acts. And, I was going back into drafting, I was enjoying it. But then there was the revision of subsidiary legislation as well. which would be the next project to undertake. So I was also considering like I really like drafting. I really like being able to, like just find what kind of solutions there are. And I think you also kind of reach that age in your career because I was probably about 10 years in, where you just wanted to, see what else was there in the world. So I did consider postings to maybe the ministries and statutory boards. But then there was also the opportunity like, hey, why not, try private practice? Because in practice, it's a different metric. Um, it doesn't matter like, what was your background. It doesn't matter what were your grades. Actually, what mattered was, can you connect with people? Do people trust you? And your metric is different. It's end of the day how much you bring in. So there were various opportunities. So why did I decide private practice? And I think why Drew? I started off as a legislative drafter. I think that was my main skill set. And it was, I think, with very clear-eyed clarity that various friends were advising me that, to go into practice, you need something that you can do. You can't go in there as a 10 PQE, 10, basically 10 years lawyer, and expect them to train you from scratch on like mergers and acquisitions is just not gonna fly. So I looked for teams that actually had some legislative drafting work and also work in the tech sector because that was what I had done in legislation division. So I actually narrowed it down to two firms that did law drafting for other countries. One was Drew and one I will not name. Um, because I in the end went to Drew. So I applied to Drew to the team. No connection. The boss is not my uncle or anything. And it was really fortuitous because he called me down for interview, and I think the rest is history. So I spent 3 years with the team and loving every day of it.
Great. What would you say is the biggest cultural difference working for Drew and working for the government?
Hmm. So I think the biggest difference is that in the private sector, a lot of things are I mean, at the end of the day, it is a bottom line. It is for profit. So everything you do, actually, you actually have to have at the back of your mind, this dollar cents calculation, like, will it lead to a certain amount of work? What's the ROI? But whereas in government, you could just do something, because it was good. But the metric for, I think, assessing what was good would be, of course, very different because it's not about how much you bring in. How do you necessarily measure societal impact or like legislation? Is it just that if no one challenges your law, it's okay? So I think the metrics are a bit different. And I do miss that public aspect, which you don't necessarily get in the private sector. So where I guess my outlet is to, you mentioned that I like to write. I also do teach at SMU. I think that's actually my outlet where you can share a different side and, share what the law should be and just contribute. Yeah.
So both in Singapore and the US, I'm sure many other parts of the world, young lawyers face a stress filled life, so much so that many people quit practice fairly early on. You have decided not just to hang on to practice, you enjoy practice, you have thrived in both the public sector and in the private sector. What would you say to young lawyers who are just embarking on their journey? How can they be resilient and successful like you?
Um, gosh, I guess this was not a question I could have prepped for, so I'm just gonna think off the top of my head. I think two things. So the first is I think they're gonna be tough days. It's not always hunky-dory. I mean, I've worked under various colleagues, some who were of course more pleasant in personality than others. Um, so it's also a matter, I think, of your personal limits. Like, how much do you think you can hang on if you've been working till 11 p.m. for, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or even like 3 months? At what point do you, raise it to your boss and say that, you can't take it anymore? I know it's a bit of controversial advice, but you don't know how much you can take until you break. So, just try and keep pushing until you really reach that point where you're like, oh, I can't. Then talk to someone about it, sound out to someone about it. Often your friends, people you meet in law school, will be actually your best sounding board because they, at the similar stages of career, will be experiencing similar things to you. So for myself, also been very fortunate to not just have friends at my seniority, but because I do play darts with the Law Societies group. So every year we compete with the Malaysian bar to try and win the trophy. There's practitioners of all ages there. So they've actually been very kindly also offering me tips on practice, how do you build your book? How do you, just live a happy life where one of them goes to the gym at 4 p.m. all the time. So then the second point would actually be like a life audit you do every year. Um, this was told to me by one of my mentors who I worked with, Lionel. He just asked me to ask myself the question every year, are you happy? And um, you will reflect on your year and you will feel like there were some things that were okay and there were some things that were not okay. And if you're overall like more happy than not, then I guess you carry on down this path or you think about what would have to change. But if you were like really, really, really unhappy, then prepare that letter and hand it in.
And how much consulting do you do with friends, family, significant others before you make these types of decisions?
So my hubby is actually a lawyer. He started off in practice, then he went to government, then now he's in-house. So actually my hubby, who I married in 2018, I think has played quite a significant role in the decisions I make because you can bounce ideas, you can talk about personalities you've encountered and so on. Then friends, definitely you would ask them, and don't just ask your lawyer friends. What I feel friends are most helpful for is sometimes you tell them about situations or people you encounter at work. They do actually offer very practical advice how to deal with it because they might have been there before. Or they might just tell you stuff like, oh, babe, you are absolute in this situation, go apologize. So I feel like friends keep you in check. They make sure you don't believe your own hype. So very important to have that.
Do you have a pet peeve professionally? Is there anything
Um,
that sets you off? A client does something, a colleague does something?
I think professional pet peeves. Honestly, no. I feel like I've become pretty tolerant. I feel early in my career, you would get a bit annoyed, like, why don't people want to put in as much effort as you, or why not so intense? But then I heard some feedback from a close friend that, a more senior peer of mine was describing me as very intense. And I was like, oh dear, I thought of myself as pretty chilled, happy-go-lucky. So I think when you hear this sort of feedback, you calibrate. And I think now you understand where clients are maybe anxious, where they're very or they might be a bit more loud or scoldy over the phone. It's because they're also under time pressure. And having been there before now, you can empathize with it. So probably the one thing would be, someone says that they're going to send it to you by this time or this day, and then this time and day comes by and then it's crickets. I think that's when I'll start to get worried. So I again translate this into how I interact with clients and partners I work with. If I'm going to be late, I will tell them in advance so that at least they're not left waiting. So maybe the peeve would be if you're going to be late, whether it's for a meeting or to submit something, please say first.
And I hope your associates hear this and they'll let you know in advance. Um,
They're all cool. They're all cool because I'll set this expectation out first.
yeah, great. And that's very important, aligning expectations. Can you talk about a moment where you had to make a professional decision that was difficult, but because of the way that you made the decision, it shaped you, and your view of leadership today?
Okay. Well, we'll probably talk about it in a bit more abstract terms. Can't really review the exact nature of the situation. But I made a mistake early in my career with a document. Honestly, it was the kind of mistake where I don't think anyone would know unless something exploded. And it was more likely that I would win the lottery than I think that happening. But it kind of bothered me. So I actually went to my then boss and said, I actually had done this. I know I shouldn't have. What can I do about it? And that person's advice was actually like, he considered the matter, and he was like, okay, you know what? We're not going to recall this document. We're not going to call attention to it. We're just going to let sleeping dogs lie. But he's like, don't do it again. But I think he knew that I had definitely learned my lesson because I was panicking. Um, but what I appreciated about what I learned about this was that you want to be that kind of leader. You want to be that kind of boss where um, juniors will come and self-declare, confess if something went wrong. Even if out of abundance of caution, even if they think no one's going to find out and it's a potential black mark against them, right? Because they might think it's small, but you'll be like, can you do this? You want to be that kind of safe leader such that they will bring problems to you and you find out rather than like the client finds out or the judge finds out or the regulator finds out. So I think having to say that I made a mistake when knowing that it might not, I could probably just have kept quiet about it. was a bit of a test.
And let's talk about opportunity costs, because you have to make decisions all the time about what to pursue and what to decline. How do you decide which opportunities to pursue and which to decline?
Mm, Gosh, okay, that's a good question and also a very tricky question. Um, Okay, because as a young partner who's trying to build a practice, trying to build a book, you want to get as much exposure and experience as possible. So you want to be able to put your name out there. At the same time, you want to meet people, you want to learn from them, because panels are a great way. So it's not the panel itself, but it's the pre-discussion with your panelists on a Zoom call before you go on stage that actually you really learn a lot about them in the industry. I'm very aware of the time costs because in a very recent panel talk I gave, it was a 1.5 hour panel, but I spent about 8 hours prepping for it so that I would have like the latest industry insights and all to share. So I think I have three principles when it comes to considering invites. So the first would be who's asking. So if it's a random, like, dear sir, madam, you want to attend our conference that lands in my inbox, that they're sending it to everybody and anyone, then clearly it's okay. But if it's like a friend or like a friend of friend who says so and so recommended that I speak with you, then that's the first threshold. I'll seriously consider. Then the second one will be the question I ask will be, can I do it? So if it's something about like M&As, then I'm sorry, I will pass it to someone who I know can do it. But otherwise, if it's something that it's within my expertise, or if I just have to spend like 3, 4 hours to buffer up what I know because it's adjacent, sure, I will take it. But then I guess there's the last criteria also, which is whether it's aligned with what I enjoy doing. So like if anyone asks me to like guest lecture at their class in a university, yes, because I really love interacting with like university students. I honestly feel like before you start working, you don't have a filter. So any kind of question you ask, right, it's because you genuinely want to know. And it kind of makes you think about, what's the foundation for me as a practitioner having a belief or thinking the industry works a certain way. So academic, definitely yes. But maybe I guess now for certain engagements, it might be um, I guess you just have to see whether it fits with maybe a market that you're able to break into, or if it's something that you might just want to give it a shot. So I know it's very hard to like maybe just say no off the because you always wonder about that door you closed. Um, so I think really it's just by and large, I'll say yes, unless I don't have the time, don't have the expertise, or if I just feel the asker is a bit sketchy. Yeah.
Well, and we are very grateful that you said yes to us.
No
Uh,
one can say no to you, Daryl. I really appreciate you asking me for this.
oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. Uh, when you think about AI, you're known for AI, you talk a lot about AI. How did you get into specifically AI, and was there a strategy that you took in mapping how you want to build that reputation for yourself?
I think AI kind of, honestly, it's not something I planned to do starting my career. I genuinely thought I'll be a drafter forever. And in drafting, how do you get your sort of area is that your management will just put you into different teams. So some do finance, some do manpower, and so on. So I was quite lucky in my time in legislation that I had some work related to autonomous vehicles to handle. Then also, there was a certain overseas missions to study how other jurisdictions use like AI and automation in delivering public services. So, because of the location, it was really popular. I think many people did want to go. So we volunteered ourselves, but you had to kind of put up a compelling reason why you. So I was actually very thankful to be chosen by my management to be able to go there as one of the three lawyers going there um, and learned a lot from them. Came back, thought like, wow, actually, I really want to think about like, if you have like robot judges, they make the adjudication on behalf of the people, or what can you do? So I tried to sort of like ask for more tech related work within legislation, and that was also given. So after that, when I moved into practice, because I had done some tech related work, especially relating to AI, automation. So this was something that the industry, when I moved out in 2022, was just starting to pick up. So I'm very thankful that I had a bit of experience already to move to Drew. So when I was in Drew, I was specifically tasked like, hey, we want to build this particular AI practice. So, I trust you, said my boss Chongkin, I trust you. You do what you have to do. And he was very supportive. So in my initial years, so in 2023, for example, that's actually how I met you, Daryl. There was the IPOS International Talk
Right.
to talk about AI regulation. So he actually was away. So he said, hey, Cheryl, why not you go and give that talk? Because you have this experience, you know what you're doing. Why don't you go? And I thought that was really great of him because he could have easily passed it to another senior colleague, of his same
And we
seniority.
would
He's
not
about
have
20
met.
years more senior, and we would never have met. So it was really great of him to have that belief. And when a boss believes in you like that, you don't want to let them down, right? So I think he's also let me run what I want. Like you want to write articles, Cheryl, like go ahead. So I started to write because in part I told you like you want a platform to be able to maybe your certain views and you want to share them. And now that you're not in government, you actually have a bit more liberty to share your views because your views won't be taken as binding that particular regulator. So I started to write. So I wrote my first article for the Singapore Law Gazette. That was, I think, in 2023, I think around April. So it's really kind that the publications director, then Charmaine, had said, hey, do you want to write another article for us now relating to the use of AI for lawyers? So actually, I think her encouragement to ask me to write another article made me think, actually, I could do this. So the article followed, then other articles followed actually. Because every time there are interesting AI developments, I'll be like, hey, I'm interested in this. I want to know more. So, as you read more, you also start to realize what kind of literature about a certain topic is missing. And then you're like, maybe I could write that. So um, another of my articles was, I think, in relation to liability for like large language models or your AI chatbots. So as soon as the Air Canada Moffat case came out, I was like, okay, Singapore, no one's written about this yet. I need to get the article out within a month. So it was just a lot of writing in that. So I think it's about trying to keep a hold on the trends. And I'll confess also there is a certain amount of hustling involved. So sometimes you meet people at conferences, you don't hesitate to say like, hey, if you like to do a collaboration, I'm happy to speak at your event, or if I've got one, why don't you come and speak at mine? So actually my first so-called academic guest lecture was because I attended an event at SMU. I sat opposite Prof. Lee Bygrave during the dinner, and we were exchanging our views on, AI regulation, like, do laws mean anything and so on. And he was like, yeah, why don't you come over and, you could possibly do a guest lecture at the University of Oslo. And I was like, yes. And then I made sure to follow up by email. So I think that happened. And after that, Prof. Liu Hanwei from SMU also asked, would you like to do one for his class that he taught data governance? So that was definitely a yes as well. So I'll be lecturing for Prof like probably every year. So again in March I'll be meeting him. So I'm very grateful to like the people who engage me as because I think it's definitely an opportunity. So I think that's kind of how I fell into it. Like you do a bit of work, you meet people, you do a good job with them, then they give you a repeat engagement and so on. So it's all like cumulative. I know it sounds like really strange, but there was this piece of advice I heard from a movie star. I just can't remember who it was, but that guy was saying that he would he would always make sure he kept fit because you never know when a director comes around with a script saying that you need a shirtless role and then you need to report on set tomorrow. And if you're a bit chunky and out of shape, then you'd not be able to take that role. You need like 6 months to get into shape. So I guess for me, the it's kind of a similar philosophy that you want to always be prepared so that if someone would ask you to do something, you can say yes instead of thinking like, maybe I need more time.
Thanks. That's great. Let me follow up with a question that a senior associate might be interested to hear, and that is trying to balance practice with business development. And you clearly have found time for speaking, teaching, writing, which is incredible. And at that same time, you have billable hours that you need to meet. So how do you balance these things?
Um, okay, the unfortunate answer is it will come at a cost. Like everything has a price to be paid. So my days don't end at 6. I will be very candid to say that I'll probably start my days if it's a like there's no meetings in the morning. I'll probably when I take the train to work, I will take the long way. So I've got an hour on the train where I'm just sitting and I can do work in there. Start my day about 10 a.m. I'll leave at 6 to have dinner with my hubby. But then from like 8 to 11, I'm working again. I have to work probably at least one weekend. So on the weekends, I do have a practice where I try not to work on either Saturday or Sunday, just one day where I'll just not work. But then the other day is actually spent working. So I think there is a cost in terms of hours. You have to put in the hours because you can't balance everything. So there will be trade-offs. Um, so I wish I would give a more optimistic answer, but I think that is honestly
Realism
the
is good.
reality. Yeah,
Yes.
the
And,
realism.
and
Yeah.
and and do you write to clients, partners, associates after hours and expect a response after hours?
So it depends on how urgent the matter is. So if it's urgent, like then I will actually have to ask the people I'm working with to please stand by. But otherwise, I do have a practice where if I send an email out, I will usually put like after dear so and so in square brackets, I'll say, for action on Monday or for action only tomorrow when you're in, so that they know straight away it's not there. So honestly, when you send out emails like that, it's not because you want them to work. It's sometimes like a thought comes into your head, and if you don't send out the email, you are going to forget. I could put that on my to-do list, like send email to, so and so tomorrow, but then it's more mental load for me. I have to put it on my to-do list and remember. So I send it out, but I'll put that in square brackets. Um, but I think sometimes it's just the nature of the job as well. I would say that as you progress, you get a bit more experience as to which emails, it's a now, and which emails you can probably wait like 1 or 2 days.
Thanks. That's very helpful. I think that will save young lawyers listening to this a considerable amount of stress. Hopefully, if they have got understanding partners and colleagues like you. Let's zoom out for a moment because a lot of the people listening to this may not understand Singapore, and certainly I think very few understand the legal culture in Singapore. Can you tell us a little bit about what being in Singapore as a lawyer is like?
Um, Okay, so Singapore is population about 6 million. So we are a bit small in terms of like market size and so on. So quite a lot of our policies probably will not, we like just a tech friend, we just don't have that market share. To be like a market leader. So sometimes we do actually have to follow, we're a bit of a price taker where it comes to certain um laws, certain kinds of regulations, because like the uh, big tech in Silicon Valley and all, what they do will actually impact us. So it's interesting because you have to kind of keep an eye on both. And also Singapore is quite a strategic region, I think, in terms of geopolitics. So, we really just want to work with anybody and everybody, right? Whether China, EU, US, Africa, and so on. So that's, I think, the a very interesting thing where everyone can come and do business in Singapore. We are really open to anyone. In terms of legal practice in Singapore, it's generally a 4-year degree. Then you can go out. So actually, you will start practice quite young if you're female. You can start at 23. The men start at 25 if you're Singaporean, because you're
And
two
it's an
years under military
undergraduate
service.
degree. It's a 4-year
Yeah.
undergraduate degree. Yeah.
Yeah. So you are given quite a lot of responsibility, I think, when you first go out. It's sort of like a apprenticeship system almost, where you work closely under the supervision of your partner and his associates. Um, Legal practice is quite varied, honestly. Like, I'm sure lawyers across all countries, I mean, end of the day, because you're in practice, you have the billable hour, you have to fulfill that. Um, but I guess what I like about practicing law in Singapore is that our regulators actually give quite a lot of guidance. I mean, it wasn't a thing for me to look at when I was in legislation division because I only wrote the laws, not the guidance policy papers after. But actually coming out, you realize there's a treasure trove of stuff. They even give you like model contracts for transferring data overseas, model contracts for employing people, a lot of like guidance as to how they might interpret a provision, a statutory provision. So actually, it's really helpful to practice when there are these documents. I mean, of course, they're non-binding, but no one issues a document without actually intending to, for it to carry a certain weight, and there's a certain expectation from the public that you will abide by what you have shared. So I genuinely find the level of guidance out there, very helpful. Um, I think another thing I enjoy about practicing in Singapore is that there's quite, well, maybe because just, I might speak maybe just for the tech space because that's why I'm in. I find there are a lot of engagements by the regulators. They will get people from the industry down for discussions where they will give you like hypotheticals and say, okay, do our laws actually apply to this? Where do you think there's a missing gap? And I do feel they actually take our views seriously. So, but I think you can only do this because, like I said, Singapore is small, population 6 million, about like 6,000 lawyers. So it's easy to like convene people, for one meeting or meeting over 2 days and just really like get them to share their views because I wouldn't have to travel like 6 hours. I just travel like 20 minutes from my office to the meeting site. So I think that's kind of an advantage where, you can really express your views in person. I mean, you have the usual public consults where you can write a response to the regulators, but speaking things, sort of telling them things sometimes off the record is actually a lot more helpful than being able to just, send in your official response to a consult where you're definitely sending something quite sanitized.
Thank you. That's a good tip. Uh, Let me ask you about competition, both from the firm's perspective, because Drew is a Singapore law firm and you have overseas law firms now that are allowed to practice in Singapore. So how does Drew position itself to compete with these firms that are better resourced, that they have got more economies of scale and they draw from a bigger talent pool? But individually for you as well, uh, people outside of Singapore, many are surprised that a law degree in Singapore is a 4-year undergraduate degree. And even in Singapore today, you have got JD degrees, you've got master's degrees, you've got people with PhDs in law. How do you position yourself as somebody that is, in addition to your formal achievements, somebody that is competitive beyond this, in this paper chase? Let's put it that way.
I try and answer your question in two parts.
Sure.
So I think in terms of like the firms, I think always having competition is good because, you at least I think you get pretty complacent. And I think international firms moving here as well, I think just makes the legal scene quite diverse. Because I speak from myself. It's interesting when you talk to friends who are in these firms, you like learn how things are structured, how profits are shared, like different models, how does work flow down. It's interesting. It's a different way. So like Drew and Napier is a local firm. So we're homegrown, Singapore-based firm. But we do of course have a network of partner firms in across ASEAN. So I think that's something where it becomes a one-stop shop. If people want any advice within ASEAN, they don't have to go to like 10 firms, they can just come to us and we will coordinate. So I think that's a certain value add that we can give to clients who are looking for advice in the region. Um, so in terms of like, I guess expanding and I mean, my personal wish would be to see a Singapore firm, one day have that kind of reach, like, like Linklaters or like Clifford, like where you're just around everywhere to have like bases in the EU, to have bases in the US. I think that would be an amazing achievement for any homegrown Singapore firm. So, whether it's my firm or whether it's another one of the bigger firms in Singapore that have the resources to do it, I genuinely think that would be a really proud moment for Singapore's history. So I will cheer them on. Even if it means like less profits for me and all that, I will cheer them on because you want to see someone in our space actually making it internationally. Then I think the other spectrum is how do you position yourself as an individual? Um, I guess it's two things. First is you know that there's always going to be people who are like more qualified, more charming, more experienced and all. So what I've learned from that is don't FOMO, don't like compare yourself to them in that way and like wish like you could have their stuff. What's helpful is actually to look at their LinkedIn, their CVs, to try and figure out like, hey, how did they get there? What path did they take? Look at the deals they put on your firm's website to figure out like, okay, if I want to do this, should I try and get more of these kinds of deals? Then the other way is to, I guess, make yourself quite attractive to the market that you're trying to court. So I guess before joining Drew, my Mandarin wasn't really great, but it improved over time because we do have quite a lot of Chinese clients, and some of them actually prefer speaking their native language. So I wouldn't say my proficiency is at full professional proficiency, but it was enough for a 7-hour call with the business teams of a Chinese tech company to explain a contract that was drafted in English, translated for them in Mandarin and explain the impact of every clause. So um, ever since I had to do that call, like now every time my firm says, can you do a pitch to a Chinese client? Or we've got some lawyers who are visiting. Can you share with them about the tech scene in Singapore in Mandarin? I'll be like, okay. But I will caution that I like for yeah to prepare my script. So the first time I did it, I rehearsed 7 times. Now I cut down to 3 times. I'm hoping to just eventually be able to speak on the fly. So it takes a lot of effort, I think, for the individual lawyer to I think you have to want to do it. I think that's probably the biggest tip I'll have for lawyers out there who are trying to break into new markets. I think you have to want it, and you have to put in the time. Because no one's going to reward you for rehearsing your script 7 times. It's not billable as well, but you have to do it because it's a mark of respect for your guests that you actually do try and speak to them properly instead of like, some Chinese and some English, some Chinese again.
Thank you. So we're close to the end of our conversation. I do want to give you a chance to uh, give a closing statement if you like, but some summative reflection on what folks should take away from you, from your thoughts, from your experience about leadership.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I guess you can be a leader at any age because it's not like you have to be 50 or something to be considered a leader. Um, and there's no like special leadership school you can go to be a better leader, even though I mean there are, but it doesn't I think it tells you like tools in a toolkit you can use, like how to give feedback, but it doesn't make you a better person. I think it's inherent and you are gonna be the sum of the parts, like all the people you've actually encountered when you were in school, starting a career, sort of learn the best from them. And then from those who you had like not so great experiences with, I think it would shape you to be, don't be that person, basically. So you've got good examples and you've got really negative examples. And I think the last thing I'll say is that you can kind of learn tips on how to improve yourself or just be a better lawyer or a better person from like literally anyone you encounter because I mean, there are times where I've sat next to people at conferences, we'll exchange tips. I know early in my career, I sat next to someone at a conference. He's in the venture capital space. So we got chatting and I was like, how do you do it? Like you're so confident, you'll speak in front of people. I feel like a fraud, an imposter sometimes. So he actually gave really helpful tips and sent like quite a lot of videos over on like, how do you how do you connect to people? How do you just start speaking? So I thought that was really helpful, really nice thing of him to do for someone he will probably never meet again. Um, so there's some learning everything. And honestly, Daryl, at the event where we met at, because I know the sequence of that day was such that uh I think they had to move the speaker sequence around because one had to leave early. So that did impact the time that everybody had for their matters. And for you personally, you had flown in from the US to also speak and moderate. And what I found was really helpful was one of our speakers, Jeff, I think he knew that there was a time crunch. I think he also knew that it was my first time speaking and I really wanted to say a lot of things. He actually took the initiative after to cut what he had prepared short so that I would actually have, more time to speak and everyone else had the time to also add their views. So that very simple gesture for him, actually, I do remember because he had 40 minutes, but I think he only spoke for 20, also leaves an impact. So I think people make decisions on the fly that I think just show what kind of person they are. So that's my hope to the audience. Leave a legacy and don't be that partner that everybody talks about.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. It's so thoughtful, so generous, and we are grateful for the reflections that you've shared. I know our listeners will take away a great deal for them. And thank you again, Cheryl, for joining us on this episode of Profiles in Leadership.
Thanks, Daryl. I'll catch you again in person when you're in Singapore.
Thank you.